So President Biden has proposed a budget in which he will increase taxes on corporations and the wealthy to help protect Medicare. Is that a bad thing, as Republicans are claiming? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So what we hear all the time from conservatives is that increasing taxes is bad for the economy, and that the way to stimulate the economy is by reducing taxes. Each time we've heard that, those claims have fallen flat. I mean, we heard it with Donald Trump's big tax cut for the wealthy, how that was going to generate this huge economic boon. Well, that never materialized. They went overboard in Kansas to try to prove that trickle-down economics worked. All that happens was the economy went to hell in a handbasket there, and the Democrats were elected. In Kansas, of all places. But yet, this is one of those myths that just refuses to die. And it refuses to die because of the fact that the rich don't want to be taxed. I mean, I'm not so keen on paying taxes, but I understand the fact that it's part of what everyone contributes so we can have a civil society. Do I wish my taxes were less? Of course I do. I also wish my electric bill were lower and my gas bill and any number of other bills I have. Taxes seem to especially stick in our craw because of the fact that we see it coming out of our paycheck every 2 weeks. Those deductions from our paycheck really just get us right there, don't they? Listen, I get it. I'm a wage earner too. But that point speaks to the first problem, which is that here in the United States, we tend to tax wages. Quite heavily, in fact. Certainly when compared to the taxes that we impose on investments. In other words, we're basically, through our tax system, punishing those who actually work to the benefit of those who live off their investments. That doesn't seem fair, does it? Well, that's just the start, as it turns out. It's worth noting, by the way, despite Republican claims to the contrary, that the United States is actually relatively low taxed. I mean, check out this chart here that looks at all the countries in the OECD, the Organizational for Economic Cooperation and Development. In this chart, you can see here the average tax burden for an OECD country. Below that, you see Japan, you see Ireland, which is actually considered a tax haven. Iceland, another tax haven. United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and lo and behold, the United States way down here, just above Korea, Israel, Switzerland, Mexico, New Zealand, and Chile. Point being that other countries that have, frankly, pretty booming economies have a much higher tax burden than us, including Germany up here. And here's Poland, also above the OECD average. So let's talk about how we have heavy taxes here in the United States and how they hurt the economy. They kind of don't ring right, do they? Here's another chart that shows you how tax rates have gone down over time. You know those 1950s when the economy was booming? Well, guess what? They had incredibly high tax rates back then. And the top marginal tax rate, the tax rate paid by the very wealthy, was much higher than that paid by everybody else. The difference between those two shrank to its lowest in the 1980s, thanks to Ronald Reagan. But then when Bill Clinton came into office, whoop, check it out. The tax rates went up. And do you remember how bad the economy was back in the 1990s as a result of that? Just kidding. We had historic growth during that period. Here, by the way, is the tax reduction that George W. Bush brought in. Here's the tax increase that Barack Obama brought in. And here's part of the tax cut that Donald Trump brought in. Notice, by the way, who's unaffected by these changes. That would be everybody else. Point being that right now, the difference between the tax rate the wealthiest are paying versus the tax rate that everyone else is paying is at a historically small margin. So can the rich pay more without impacting the economy? Clearly they can. Finally, this is a good issue for the Democrats, because frankly, most Americans sense that the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. And they're right, as I've already shown here. As a result, the research has been very consistent that most Americans support raising taxes on the wealthy. Indeed, when you ask Americans, do you think the federal government should or should not pursue policies that try to reduce the gap in wealth between the richest and poorest Americans? By a margin of 52 to 27, nearly 2 to 1, Americans say yes. And when you ask if people think billionaires are taxed too little, by a margin of 57 to 10, nearly a 6 to 1 margin, Americans do think billionaires are taxed too little. And finally, when you ask if there should be some minimum tax that is paid for by the wealthy, by a margin of 61 to 22, nearly a 3-1 margin, Americans say yes. So this is both a good issue for the Democrats, and it's the right thing to do. You can imagine exactly the kind of thing Republicans would be opposed to. This is exactly the kind of issue that we should be happy that President Biden is picking up and running with, because it's exactly the kind of thing that will result in the Democrats having another good election next year. Well, if you want to see another video where I talk about how billionaires have gotten away with paying too little taxes, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.